If you're wondering how you're so addicted to things such as your phone, gambling, overeating, overbuying, then you have to understand the scarcity loop. And that's what we're going to talk about this week, guys, because last week we talked about how and why our cell phones are tearing apart our families, our marriages, and our relationships. This week, we're going to talk about what's actually creating that habit loop so that you can know it, you can understand it, and then you can break it. For those of you that don't know me, my name is 𝘺𝘆𝘏𝑒𝑣. I'm a best-selling author, former first responder for 15 years. I've been married for almost 15 years, and I have two beautiful kids. And if you know my story, it was a pain to purpose story. You know, after 10 years of being married and having just 1 week being good, 1 week being bad, nothing ever seemed to be right in my marriage. I could never figure it out. And my wife eventually made an ultimatum to me and said, you got to figure this out. You got to get better or we're done. And I went on a quest, and I didn't think it was going to be possible. Honestly, I didn't think I could change. I didn't think our marriage could change, especially after 10 years of the same stuff happening over and over again. And the reality is, in 3 months, I was able to radically change our marriage. And since then, it's only gotten better and better. Now I'm on a mission to empower other men to do the same, because I was making a lot of mistakes. I was unconscious, and I didn't even see the mistakes I was making until I started doing some of this deep work. And this was already after having been a life coach and a best-selling author and all these other things. I was just missing it. And there were just these little nuances and these big shifts. So if you guys want to learn more about that, my coaching, and just how some of those things work, please feel free to reach out to me, drop me a line, and I can get you the details. All right, let's jump into this week's training. Okay, first of all, you have to understand the habit loop, okay? Now, it starts with this. First, you have to have an opportunity. That's step one for entering some kind of a loop of addiction, right? So there has to be an opportunity. Obviously, we know that. The second part of this cycle is unpredictable rewards. Now, this is really key. And what do I mean by unpredictable rewards? What we're talking about is sometimes you might win, sometimes you might lose. This is gambling, right? We know this. Like, you pull down the lever on the slot machine, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. You don't always win. Because if you always won and you knew you had this certainty, it would be kind of boring. You wouldn't play again. But because it's unpredictable, it draws you back into doing it. The third piece of this is quick repeatability. Now, let's just use the slot machine example. We know you pull it, you lose, great, you can do it again. You can do it again, right? It's easy to repeat. So this is the loop, guys. This is the ultimate trigger for what we call the scarcity mindset. And a lot of this information I drew from Michael Easter's book called The Scarcity Brain. So if you want to learn more, go read that book. Now, this is the same mindset that they've used for slot machines. And they took players from playing 300 games in an hour to 900. So it wasn't always this way. They kind of figured out, oh, this is how we're going to craft this. Now, let's talk more about these three things that I mentioned. First, the opportunity. That's to get something of value that will improve your life. But it comes at a risk, because you might win, you might lose. The second big piece, again, unpredictable rewards, right? There's decades of research that have shown that predictable rewards are dull. So the key to gambling is anticipating a reward. Remember last week we talked about dopamine? That's that anticipation neurotransmitter. It's the wanting. It's the, ooh, I might get something. You're just not sure when. Because if you know you're going to receive the reward, but you're not sure when, that's how you get sucked in. So remember, everyday behaviors that occur the same way every time, boring. But slot machines, they change. They're dynamic. These moments, when we wait to learn the outcome of an unpredictable reward, they're in fact exciting. These moments, when we wait to learn the outcome of an unpredictable reward, are in fact so exciting that Stanford neuroscientists discovered that they become rewarding in and of themselves. The brain's excitement and reward circuitry reacts strongest during these moments where we're waiting to find out if we got the reward. Here's another big thing, near misses. Now, they do this on purpose, especially when you're gambling. If you just had a near miss, they found that will invigorate players to play 33% longer. And I just go back to my days as a first responder, or times where you almost died, or just these near, misses with danger. You think like, well, why wouldn't you just get out of this loop? This is not a good thing to be a part of. But now I can even see how this can trigger the brain, like, oh, maybe like you almost got caught, or this almost happened, right? That near miss is going to invigorate you to then do it again. So just think about that when you're getting into these addiction cycles. Let's talk about quick repeatability. Now, most everyday behaviors, like we talked about, they've got a clear beginning, they got a clear end. So if you have an itch, you scratch it, it goes away. Well, research shows that the faster we can repeat a behavior, the more likely we are to repeat it. So speed kills in this case. Now, let's talk about why we actually do this. We consistently find that the value or reward of a behavior depends in part on how often you think you'll get the reward. So if you're almost certain that the reward will happen, it's nice. But if you're unsure the reward will happen, then you're very excited when it happens. So much so that you actually make suboptimal decisions. Let's take the example of hunting and having to constantly look for your food. For us to survive, the scarcity brain had to develop systems that pushed us into this loop, which leads us to dopamine, the brain chemical that is famous, but it's also misunderstood. Thinking about hunting, right? We actually didn't know if we were going to make it back in the day. Like, we couldn't just go to the supermarket. We had to go on these treks. We might go 3-4 days not getting food. If you ever watch the show Alone, these guys don't know when they're going to get their food, and then all of a sudden, boom, they get their food. And so it's that surge, right? Like 4 days of not getting food, and then a big reward. So you can see how this cycle, we've been programmed from at an early, caveman ancestral age, right? Remember with dopamine, though, this is a big mistake. It's not the pleasure-seeking neurotransmitter that we've all been told. It doesn't make us do or believe anything. It just makes us more likely to pursue rewards, even in situations where the reward is maladaptive. It's not good for you. Once we know something is pleasurable or rewarding, dopamine's released when we're pursuing or anticipating that we're going to receive that pleasurable thing, not when we're actually receiving it. So the expectation of possibly receiving a reward really excites the dopamine system. Dopamine peaks when we don't know if we'll get that reward, okay? Now, let's talk about the scarcity loop and where does that actually live? Because this loop is what makes social media, which I've been talking about for a while now, work. Posting offers us an opportunity to enhance our social standing. And each notification that we get, it feels like the unpredictability of spinning the reels. So, did we get a like? Did we get a comment? Did we get a DM? How many? And did this deliver news of social acceptance, such as likes, positive comments, or was it rejection? Minimal likes, or even some snarky comments. These are all the unpredictability that's drawing us back into the loop. So scrolling the feed also tosses us into the loop. It's a search for something that might make us happy, sad, annoyed, outraged, envious, surprised. Infinite scrolls allow for quick and endless repetition. Make sense? Now, why do we crave more? Our scarcity brain defaults to more and rarely considers less. And so when we do consider less, we often think, this sucks. People systematically overlook subtraction. Matter of fact, American homes are 3 times larger than they were in 1970. We own 233% more clothes than we did in 1930. Restaurant portion sizes are 4 times larger than in 1950. Everything from cars to refrigerators to microwaves to these coffee makers, they're larger, they're packed with techie more features. I mean, why do we actually need a dishwasher that connects to our cloud? Why is that important? They even, incoming university presidents, they're nearly 10 times more likely to add new programs than they are to subtract programs that aren't working. We create and consume 90 times more data and information today than we did just 15 years ago. High-level employees, they're spending an average of 130% more time in meetings today than they did in the 1960s. Our brains are designed to constantly scan and prioritize these scarcity cues, those tip-offs in our environment that make us feel as if we don't have enough. Kelly Goldsmith, a scientist at Vanderbilt University who studies scarcity cues, said this mindset even affects the affluence and relatively comfortable people, right? Those that are doing well. I mean, think about it. If you're running out of milk or you're running out of ink in a pen, this can feel like a threat. And we found that when you threaten people's access to everyday things, they grab more for themselves and they're less likely to give to others. More makes us feel safe. Think about the pandemic, guys. Our minds are less efficient when they feel they lack something, whether it's money, time, calories, even companionship. We rarely stop and appreciate. We're actually designed to habituate and move the goalpost. So what was an unexpected pleasure yesterday is what we feel entitled to today and won't be enough for tomorrow. So what makes us slip into this loop and the motives of the larger forces who are using it? Well, let's talk about this guy, Thomas Nantal, who's a scientist, and he discovered something funny about his gambling pigeons. So an experiment was set up with these gambling pigeons. They had one group that they had to peck a certain amount of times to get food. Now, the first group, they pecked once, twice, they got food. Then they peck, peck, peck a couple more times. They didn't get anything, and the loop would start again. Now, the interesting thing with that group is when they pecked for the second time, they would get food. This is repeated over and over. They got food the second time they pecked, which was great. But the food was smaller portions. The second group of pigeons, they had to peck multiple times until like they hit the fifth peck. Then they got food. So it took them longer than the first group to get food. However, the reward was more. They got more from that reward, even though it took them longer. And what he found in that first experiment, which was interesting, is you would think if you kept pecking and you got to the second peck, you got food. Wouldn't you just keep doing that peck? Because you're going to get food sooner. And over time, they saw it was like a 400% increase if they kept doing that. But the pigeons didn't do that. They actually gravitated to the second gambling option, which was to peck 5 times. So it took them longer. They actually got less food. But because the reward felt bigger and they had a bigger portion, they ended up going into that loop easier. So what he did this time is he took those same pigeons and he put those pigeons in small cages. And they seemed, they were fine. It wasn't like they adapted very well. They weren't harmed or anything. It was just a smaller environment they lived in. He then would take those same pigeons and he put them in cages that were larger. And it felt more like they were living their real habitat. They could actually like fly onto ledges and things. And he wondered what would happen if he presented the pigeons with the 2 games after they'd spent time living like a real pigeon in the wild habitat. And after that, the birds actually started choosing optimally. They chose game number 1, the non-gambling game. And there's a model called optimal stimulation model. And that's when it gets below that we search for stimulation. And he found, and what he said is, we found that if pigeons had alternative forms of stimulation that were more like their real world life habitat, it seemed to reduce the likelihood that they would choose the gambling game for a substantial amount of time. The pigeons could, in a way, they could realize they had enough. They were fulfilled by what they had. They craved less. They didn't want to escape into the scarcity loop. And when you think of humans today, they get bored with how easy it is to get resources. We don't have to hunt for food. We search for other ways to fill this gap in stimulation, to distract or comfort ourselves. And so to put it simply, when our needs aren't met, we gamble, we shop online, we eat just to eat, we overuse social media, or even do drugs. So think about that, guys. How are your needs being met? At the extreme end of the scarcity brain lies addiction. And addiction is chronically seeking a reward despite its negative consequences. Under that framework, though, our ancestors they were all addicts. Early humans had to go on epic hunts just despite all these incredible dangers they faced. Brain scans even show that addiction lies in the same system of the brain that's involved in love, whether it's a partner or a child. And that system quite naturally evolved to create compulsive behavior despite its consequences. This is why it's so easy to fall into love. That's why they talk about it, right? So how do you escape the loop? Let's end with this. How do you escape the loop? Well, a doctor who specializes in addiction said this. This is the best advice he gave to his patients. You got to make a big change. Change your circle. Go to school. Educate yourself. Get a job. Change your job. Take courses. Improve your skills. Learn to read. Pour yourself into books. Actively go out. Make friends. Change your friend group. Make big changes. This leverages the first and second ways to get out of the scarcity loop. First, remember, it takes opportunity. It takes the opportunity away. When we make a big change, new and more enticing opportunities can open up, and those come with their own set of unpredictable rewards. And that alters the second phase. These new rewards, they outweigh the short-term comfort of substance use. Most drug addicts, they'll get clean by 30 because once people hit that age, suddenly their life is more constricted. They don't have the needless time to sit around and get high or recover from hangovers. They get married, they get a career, they start raising kids, and they begin finding meaning and purpose and love and comfort elsewhere. 𝘺𝘰𝘯𝘥𝘦𝘳𝘠, a former Stanford professor and tech entrepreneur who wrote the book Hooked, How to Build a Habit-Forming Product, wrote, problematic technology use is about the interaction between the product, the person, and the ability to cope with discomfort, and then a situation in their life that causes a pain they're not equipped to deal with. So when you have the confluence of these 3 factors at the same time, it can create an experience that you can actually put yourself into where tech products help immediately forget about all your problems. Guys, I hope this really helped you, congeal and come up and have some aha moments about how this tech is really destroying our lives and why it's just so easy. Once you start to understand the habit loop, opportunity, unpredictable rewards, quick repeatability, right? Are your human needs being met? Are or is your life steady? If it's not, maybe that's why you're falling back into this loop. It's just so easy. It's so easy because we have quick access. So I hope this was helpful to you. Next week, we're going to dive a little bit more and we're going to wrap things up in what are some of the things that we can do to break this loop for sure? What are some other ideas? We're going to dive a little bit more into dopamine. I think it's really important. Other than that, have an amazing week. I hope this was impactful for you, and I wish your families the best. I'll see you guys next week.